Hello and welcome to our latest SINAM panel event in partnership with our gold sponsor CGI, and today we will be exploring the topic of diverse minds for unique challenges. Who, how and why we should be continuing to drive diversity in recruitment within the tech and cyber sectors. I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming three wonderful people to our panel event today. We have Sahar Baftia, we have Tristan Wilkinson, and we have Joe Dupay as well. Thank you all for joining me, and looking forward to exploring this very interesting and vital topic actually for our industry at this moment in time. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves, if I may, starting with you, Joe. Joe, welcome.
Hi, I'm Joe. I work for CGI since January 2020. Before working for CGI, I was in the Royal Air Force for 22 years. So I had a full service career there. And that's me, really.
And you recently joined the cybersecurity industry.
Yes, I have, yes.
Wonderful. And we're going to explore that journey of how you found moving into this fantastic industry from a different sector previously a little bit later on. Fantastic. Thank you. Tristan, how about yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Hello, I'm Tristan. I guess the short version is I'm Director of Strategy for a newly formed charity called the Digital Poverty Alliance. We're focusing on digital inclusion. So believe it or not, in this country, there's still about 11 million people that don't have sufficient digital skills to do the things they need to do online. So we're tackling that. A little bit about my history. I took the long way to get here. I left school at 16 with no qualifications. And when I mean no qualifications, I mean no qualifications. And 20 years later, found myself working within the strategy unit at number 10, advising the Prime Minister on industrial strategy. So the bit in between is quite interesting. I went back to university and got myself a degree. And I think this topic is really important. Having taken a fairly unorthodox route to get to where I am, I'm absolutely passionate about making sure that the system doesn't have intrinsic biases built into it that basically weed out people who have lots of potential but maybe can't navigate their way through the system.
Excellent. We're looking forward to getting lasered in onto that as we move forward within today's session. Thanks, Tristan. Sahar, lastly but definitely not least, onto you and briefly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Sahar. I joined CGI in 1998 as a graduate, a very long time ago. I did a chemistry degree, and as it was a numerate degree, it enabled me to apply for a job in the IT sector. I didn't go through the traditional, formal graduate schemes, as I didn't really have those entry requirements, and I probably wasn't trained or had any practice on how to pass the assessment centres. So I got in by applying for a job on the help desk. Once I was on the help desk, they trained me up. I did a technical analyst role. Then I moved into business analysis over the years, and then eventually project management. So I can kind of juggle between project management and business analysis. And that's what I really like about the industry, is that you can do lots of different things. I also, over the years, have done people management, and I'm a qualified coach and mentor, and I'm involved on the Fast Futures program within CGI. What I also really enjoy about the company is the fact that we have lots of networks that we can get involved with, and something that I'm really passionate about is that recently, with some like-minded colleagues, I set up the neurodiversity network within CGI called Neuroverse. And I sit on the committee of that group and try to run that within the organisation. So yeah, I think what we're discussing today is quite close to my heart. So yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you, Sahar. We're going to look at neurodiversity as an area within today's discussions, as well, as it's certainly an area that has huge potential within our industry, but is also proving a challenge in leveling up how companies can be more effective in recruiting, retaining, and enabling neurodiverse talent within their recruitment strategies. So coming back to you then, Joe, I'd really love to hear more about your journey most recently and segueing into the sector, and how you found it from a diversity point of view as well. and any challenges you found, and any things you'd like to see changed. Do you want to share that with us to start?
Yeah, sure. So as I say, I joined CGI and this environment in January last year, and was really only within the department for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, and then obviously COVID hit, so we were all working from home. So that was a little, that was quite an eye opener. Having never had the opportunity to work at home before was very interesting. Trying to make sure that I was doing everything I should be doing and sort of keeping up with everything. As I sort of mentioned at the start, obviously I was in the Air Force before, and over the years obviously technology and things had changed as I was going through my career, but it was mainly I was sort of on the comm side, so kind of things tended to stay the same. But coming into this environment now, as an older lady, should I say, in my 40s, it's hard to describe really. It's a lot of my team are a lot younger than me, by at least 20 years, some of them. So it's just having, trying to keep up with those, I guess, and in this sort of environment. But I can sort of contribute in other ways that they maybe have with degrees and things, which I don't have currently. I'm studying a psychology degree at the minute through Open University, and I've just started my third year of that. So whereas they've all got IT degrees as such, I don't, but I can contribute in other ways, just for sort of like, trying to think of the word, the sort of more lived experiences, maybe, if that's the correct phrase to use.
Well, this is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think the need for a university degree or certain certifications seems to be a barrier to entry at this moment in time, and seems to be an area where diversity and inclusivity, that is a challenge, putting up those barriers. I mean, did you find the move into the industry, did you feel that there was a necessity to have a degree or certifications to go, look, I'm capable, here are my certifications, or was it less so in your recent experience?
For myself, it was less so. I was kind of got in touch with CGI through a colleague, I suppose you could say, and then I went through the recruitment process that way. And by not having a degree, that personally didn't hinder myself, because I was able to prove in other ways what I could do, because of my experiences and things I'd learned through the Air Force.
Excellent. I think CGI certainly are proving that is absolutely the case, and that necessity isn't really there. I mean, Tristan, yourself, you mentioned earlier, didn't come from a degree-led background, so similarly, what are your thoughts on these barriers to entries that we still see? Is that still a thing?
I think it is. Jo's experience is really interesting, isn't it? Because she was able to compensate the lack of that formal kind of qualification with experience, and it's interesting at what point does that degree, the value of that degree, diminish? And I've got children who are at university, and actually it's only recently occurred to me that actually the education system is just a series of milestones, and they're like stepping stones. You literally go from one to the next. So you go from your primary school, and depending where in the country you live, you might do your 11 plus, which determines do you go left or right in terms of secondary school. Then you get your secondary school, then you get your GCSEs, then you get your A levels, and then you may or may not go into university. And all of that adds up to you effectively being able to apply for certain types of jobs. The thing that would be really interesting is somebody with Jo's clear capabilities that doesn't have the experience. So I suspect, Jo, that if you are maybe in your late 20s leaving the RAF, trying to get into an organisation like CGI, whether actually it might have been harder, because kind of the closeness of your age to that degree period would have been much shorter. And so I think one of the interesting things, Chris, is how what's important and when. And my own personal journey, I left school at 16. It was just circumstance. I didn't go to a particularly good school. There was no role models. It wasn't, just where it was. It basically prepared students for one of two career paths. we had a big employer, Barclays International, were in Poole, where I was. And so if you're academic, they pushed you towards kind of accountancy and financial services, because we were the big supplier of kind of young people into that. And then if you weren't academic, there was handworthy engineering, where you basically spent your life on a lathe. Now, that was it. So if neither of those kind of paths rang your bell, you're kind of stuck, because if you spoke to the careers people, they didn't really understand anything else that was an option. So I left at 16, absolutely without any direction, and I had various jobs, and I met an incredible woman who asked me, got to know her, and she, as the job I was doing, and she said, have you ever thought of going back to university? And that one conversation literally changed my life, in that I then got myself back to university. I did a degree in architecture. I got a good degree. And without that, I would never have gone on to get the jobs that then followed. So it literally became the key that opened up a world that not only was unavailable to me, but it was a world that I because of my background, I didn't even know existed.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that ability to know that there are paths into this industry that are not proclivative on having specific certifications or a degree background. I think there is definitely a sense that the industry is becoming a little bit more enlightened about that, but there's still a long way to go. Sahar, what's your views on I guess the recruitment process at this moment in time and barriers to entry around certifications and mandated experience at the moment? How have you found that?
I kind of agree that we don't necessarily need to have a degree to apply for certain jobs. I think a lot of the jobs out there, whether they're for graduates or for professionals, they still specify degree on the job spec, still lots of qualifications and nearly 3 pages of requirements. I think that's not necessary. And I also think that there's a lot of students, or I say young people or students, who've tried to go to university but can't, because maybe they can't afford it. From different social economic backgrounds, they cannot afford to give the university fees. I think it's 8,000 or 9,000 a year now. And then all the other living costs. Then some of them who do attempt to go, they can have to drop out because either family issues, maybe they have to take over family businesses if someone's passed away, or they have COVID or any kind of illness, or they just can't afford it. There's a number of reasons why they can drop out, and that doesn't mean that they can't join an industry and train on the job and be just as good as, say, someone else who may have a degree in 2 or 3 years. So I do think that there is a pool of people that we can tap into if we just change the way we approach the recruitment. That's my view on it. I think that there's too much emphasis on having a degree. It just seems to be a tick box exercise, and if you're say you've got a certain neurodiverse condition like dyslexia or whatever, you may not be able to pass the formal structure of exams at university. And whereas you may be brilliant at a particular job, but you just cannot pass that formal structure. So, it would be a shame to lose out on those candidates, one from a company perspective, but also for the candidate who cannot better their future because they can't apply for certain jobs.
That's really interesting. So let's stick with that topic around the actual recruitment process as it stands then, because I mean, my day job is in recruitment. I own a recruitment business in cybersecurity. So we work with a huge number of different companies that have different approaches to how they find talent. But by and large, I would say the majority of companies do have a fairly cookie cutter and predictable approach to how they find, identify, go through the first, second, third stage of interviews, offer candidates. And when we talk about, as you say, neurodiverse individuals who maybe are not particularly strong from a communication point of view, maybe they do prefer to have multiple choice, maybe they prefer to have somebody with them at the interview, or different ways to do it. It does seem to be a barrier that isn't necessarily being addressed. Are you sticking with you, Sahar? Are you seeing that Is there an opportunity for us to look at maybe an approach that actually gives the candidate various options of how they are, inverted commas, vetted for suitability against a role, capability against a role, that is not just one linear way of doing things, but actually allows them to pick and choose depending on, you know, their preferences? Is that something that could happen or would be useful?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it does start off from the recruitment element, recruitment side, because really you have to make the doors more open. Things need to be more accessible, and that starts with recruitment. You know, we're very much using the very traditional approach of CVs and formal interviews, and then you might have assessment centres as well. And you know, not everybody might have the support from home or their schools on how to structure their CVs or how to perform at interviews. You know, but that doesn't mean that candidate would not you know, gel well in the team and be able to pick up the skills. So I think we need to kind of modernize the way we recruit, maybe not looking at the traditional CV and interviews in the traditional sense, maybe doing it more like as a work placement. Maybe candidates who aren't very good at doing CVs or that formal, you know, sit down with a panel, they maybe could be brought into like a live lab environment where they work with other consultants who are in that field of work and see how they work with that team in that particular field. In a live environment, we're more likely to assess candidates better in that way rather than a sit down formal question answer session. I think we need to change our approach, especially in the IT industry, in which we are a little bit different to, say, finance or teaching, you know, those kind of professions. We can do those things in our industry. And I think a lot of the consultants within the industry would support it as well. It just needs to happen. So I think changing the style of it would be good.
Really interesting, isn't it? Because I guess, you know, in those roles, penetration testing, reverse engineering, you know, coming up with some deeply technical roles within cybersecurity, where actually it's a really interesting area for neurodiverse individuals in particular, because they do, you know, often have extraordinary minds that are able to do things that what you call neurotypical, I guess, but I don't really like using that word. People would not necessarily be able to do, you know, hyper focus and being able to multitask, and you know, there were some exceptional individuals, and there were some government organisations and larger organisations like CGI who realised the talent that lies within the neurodiverse workforce in relation to cybersecurity roles, and perhaps there's an opportunity on a wider basis for the industry to be more enlightened in how we vet, attract, enable those individuals within the organisations. I'm going to segue slightly again, because we're talking about diversity at the first stage of recruitment, which is kind of the identification of and the recruiting in. But then you've got the second stage around how companies enable their employees to be not just accepted or tolerated, but genuinely empowered. And we're really, you know, this is cultural shift when it comes to some companies. Joe, how do you feel as an industry that we are getting on in terms of training and development from a cultural viewpoint within the business around educating on diversity, whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, age, neurodiversity? Are you finding that is that an area that the companies are becoming more cognizant about, and are they actually pushing out training and development on a long-term basis, do you think, Joe?
Obviously, I'm still relatively new to all of this, but I find that training and development for myself, and I think CGI as a whole, is very good. If there's any courses that we need to go on for work-related purposes, we can go on those. I've been looking at different courses, because obviously still trying to sort of find my feet and things. I'm looking at courses that I would like to go on in the future. There's lots of courses available for us to go on. So I think, personally, I think CGI do a great job with training and development.
Mm. And that's really, really good to hear. And Tristan, I know that you work with a number of different organizations as well, so a little bit more of a helicopter view within that. Are you seeing a cultural shift that goes beyond, because, you know, there is a concern here that the D&I initiative has become something of a flag waving exercise without any real change, where companies go, yes, we're diverse and inclusive, but actually behind the curtains, not really. Like, do we think that that is still happening, and do we think the companies are becoming a bit more enlightened?
I think I think that there's a lot of talk, and there's lots of statements within annual reports, but that doesn't translate down to the lived experience of people. I want to pick up on the previous point as well about the front end of the hiring process, because I still think that, you know, you can't continue a journey if you're not permitted to take the first step, right? So actually, kind of, so that bit is kind of disproportionately important. And I think that if we abstract it a little bit, if you think about any of us that have hired for a role, you just think about what goes through your mental process. Generally, there's a business need. You know, there's a capability gap, there's a capacity gap, whatever it happens to be. And there's a piece of work that you can't get done, and you as a hiring manager have a good idea of what it's going to take to fill that. So you've already started on the process of what you believe you need to fix that particular problem you have, which hiring is a problem, isn't it? You know, like I've got a lack of people to do the job I need to do. So you've already got a sense for what it takes. If it's part of a blended team, you've already got a lot of the skills and experience within that team, so you're benchmarking against them, right? So what happens is the first thing you do is you write a job description. Well, and in writing that job description, you're defining the skills and experience. You've already gone from this type of thinking really narrow, right? And then you go through your channels and who do you go to, and your selection of your recruitment partner and all of those sorts of things. All of those have some element of prejudice in it. And I think that the problem you've got is that from a candidate perspective, you're engaging with something where there's lots of decisions that have already been made. And the reality is that if you're slightly different to a very, very tight profile, let's take Sahar and I have worked on a project recently. So if you're hiring a front-end developer for a project, you'd know what sort of language you wanted them to be able to code in, what sort of tools they wanted to use. It's really prescriptive. Anybody that didn't meet that criteria, you wouldn't talk to. Now, that's a really specific example, but you get into other parts of the business where you want diverse thinking. How do you identify that? So I think the problem we have at the moment is that the roles are defined by very specific skills and experience. And to get beyond that requires a huge amount of effort on the part of the hiring people. The one thing we could do, so CGI is a fantastic Canadian company. In Canada, they do it differently. So in the UK, people like yourself, Chris, work on behalf of the employers. In Canada, the recruitment industry works on behalf of candidates. So they've completely turned it around. So what happens is that, you know, if I was looking for a job, I would find a recruiter. They would spend time to get to know me, and then they sell me into businesses that they have relationships with. And that's a completely different dynamic where they're working on my behalf. So they are invested in me as a person. They take time to get to know me. They take time to understand, you know, my strengths, my weaknesses relative to other things. And they go into their network of employers and say, I've got this person. They might look a little bit odd from the outside, and it's that but bit that they're able to explain and put some colour against, which when you're sending your CV into a portal that's maybe using AI to sift in the first experience, that's a black and white process. There is no element for colour within that whatsoever.
That's a really, really interesting observation. So yes, AI and recruitment more on a general basis at the moment does seem to be going through a transformation of its own, which is very much data-led. And let's face it, cybersecurity is still a fairly young industry. And as an outsider, consistently we find that people that are not in cyber or technology can find it very intimidating, and also really don't know what good looks like. So some of the barriers that seem to be being created are through a misled necessity that if I mandate, security analyst, 2 years experience, must have a degree in a CISSP, then I have a baseline of, okay, this person can do the job, because I don't know what capabilities I need to be able to look at beyond those certifications, because I don't really understand what it is that I'm looking at. So perhaps there's an opportunity here for the recruitment teams within larger organizations or recruitment companies more generally to align together with HR and the cybersecurity or technical leaders to really look at demystifying the roles that we're talking about, the baseline competencies of who could do this job versus who is doing this job right now. Because the problem we've got, if we only look at those people that are doing the job right now, the bias and the lack of diversity that has pervaded the industry for the last 20, 30 years remains, especially in the experienced hire layer. And that's an ongoing challenge. But it's really interesting that Canada are changing that. Tristan, sorry.
So no, that is an interesting point, and I guess I just want to play devil's advocate on that. So, as a hiring manager, by the time you've convinced whoever you need to in your organisation that you're allowed to hire somebody, and you've made that business case to spend the money and go through that process, it's to fix a problem you've already identified most of the time. And your thing about the person that's already doing it versus the person that could do it, the challenge I would have as a hiring manager is that even if I could identify successfully the person that could do this, I probably need it doing now. and it's the difference between those two things, isn't it? Now, if I'm kind of looking at graduate level recruitment, that's different. I'm trying to grow potential for people that are going to be, maybe not as productive as they could be for a number of years, because I'm investing in them and their future and the future of my business. If I've got a project team that should be 10 people and I'm missing 2 people, I need to identify 2 people that are going to come up to speed and hit the ground running. And the way to do that is to probably hire people very similar to what 8 have already got, because they're going to fit into the team. And so, and I know what I know what the skills are. I can test, I can test whether or not those skills and experience are evident. So it is difficult. I think cyber and security is kind of one of those areas where actually the divergence that we'd like to see is probably harder to achieve, because quite frankly, I could never work in cyber. So I don't have the skills, and I might bring lots of other things to the role, but I don't have the core. I don't have the core skills to be a surgeon or a mechanic or any of the other things. I couldn't do the job, and so you almost need a situation where you can identify the core skills, but also disproportionately value the other things. And to pick up on one of Sahar's points as well, I think we could put a greater emphasis on personal recommendations. So again, my recent experience of the team that Sahar and I were just working in, the best hires we made over the 18 months that I was there were people that were recommended by those already working in. And as a hiring manager, I was able to overlook things in their CV that didn't make sense to me, because the weight of the recommendation from somebody that I valued and trusted just brought so much more credibility to the process that I'd almost skip the CV stage and go straight to having an informal conversation with them, which would tell me so much more. So I think that networks and personal recommendations are channels we should invest more in.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a really interesting element, and there's 2 parts to that, if I may quickly. So if we think about affinity bias as our natural proclivity to gravitate towards people who think like us, and again, in recruitment terms, that can be really a dangerous ground to go down, because then you end up only hiring people that think and look like you do. So there needs to be a challenge around that. And so I absolutely agree that there is an opportunity to explore connections in hiring outside of what the typical core skills would look like. And I think that's a really good place to go. But I'd also caveat that to also combat the affinity bias element that might drift into that, of kind of like, oh, one of us, you know, which also is can be negative around this. So I'm going to bring you back in, if I may, and talk about what we could do potentially for younger people who might not typically be interested in cybersecurity. There's still this, and cybersecurity and technology still comes with a certain stigmas of it's a bit geeky, and there's certain things around that. What's your thoughts around what we could do better for younger generations looking at this as an industry?
Sure. I think we could probably go into schools a bit more and advertise the different roles in IT when the children are much younger. I think around age 13, because nowadays they choose their GCSEs at 13, and once you've chosen your GCSEs and A levels, you're on a particular path. Either you can go down, say, STEM subjects, or you can't because you chose geography or history or something like that. So I think going into schools and like road shows, advertising what are the roles. They're not all technical. You don't have to be a developer or a architect. There's communications, there's marketing, there's finance, there's so many other elements within an IT organization that they can do. And also, I think, in a way, not just advertising to the children, but also sometimes to the parents, because parents aren't aware of the different roles there are in the IT industry and the flexibility, and that they do have good salaries. I know a lot of people who still go down the traditional route of medicine, dentistry, law, because they are stable vocations where they know what they're getting at the end of the day. Whereas in the IT industry, I do feel that you still have good job prospects and good salaries. Maybe it's just not as well known. So I think getting in young, but then also at the same time, it boils down to recruitment. Do you need to have a numerate degree to apply for a job in the IT sector? Why can you not apply with art? Why can not apply with, say, history, art subjects? Maybe someone chose art subjects at uni because they really enjoyed it, but that doesn't mean they couldn't do a job as a business analyst or a project manager. So I think we need to tackle it from both angles, get them young before, while they're making up their minds, but then also keep the doors open if they decide to take a different path, but then want to come back into IT. And we can train them, people can be trained into business analysts, project managers, marketing. The only thing I think might be a little bit more difficult would be development.
So,
yeah.
Sahar,
sorry.
So there's a really important point in there, Sahar, as well. I mean, it's all important, but actually, the world has moved on as well, isn't it? So 20, 30 years ago, if you trained to be an accountant, you probably expected to be an accountant for all of your working life. Yeah. Whereas now, the reality is that people are kind of expecting to have 2 or 3 careers in their working life, just because of the nature of the working place is changing. Now, if we stick with our current system, it means that the degree you took, if you took a degree, becomes a ball and chain around your leg, doesn't it? Because actually, if you did a humanities degree because you wanted to become a lawyer, and then after 15 years of law, you decided actually you wanted to become a user researcher working in digital transformation, you don't have the right qualifications. You might have the right aptitude and empathy towards it and everything else, but you don't have the piece of paper. And I think that it's another example of how the current system is increasingly becoming unfit for purpose in a world where people are likely to change. And Joe's a great example. 22 years in the RAF and now working for a global technology company. That would have been maybe even more difficult if she'd studied quite a narrow subject at degree level.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. And Joe, absolutely. I think, you are a poster person for what is possible in our industry, regardless of age, regardless of the challenges there, so it's really interesting. And coming back to you, Joe, what was it, because you were in the RAF, you've had a really good, career there. I think it was in medical, wasn't it, within the RAF rather than in the technical side, or was it?
No, it was comms and IT.
Comms and
IT.
IT.
I was more the comms side than the IT side.
Excellent. And now you're the other side of the fence. How have you found that journey? How's it been?
I'm really lucky because obviously working for CGI, I've got some great colleagues that I work alongside, and I think if they call it transitioning into civilian world. I think I would have struggled a lot more if I hadn't had the good colleagues around me that I did, because a lot of things, when you've been in the military for such a long time, you're kind of, I'm trying to think of the best word to use, but you're kind of like, you're taught to think in a certain way. So I got my words all muddled up then. So you have to be at work at this time and you have to wear this uniform and you have to do these things. And if somebody's of a higher rank, for an officer, for instance, and I was a junior NCO, you're taught to salute that person, but you're not saluting them, you're saluting the Queen, and all sorts of things like that you kind of go through. And then all of a sudden all that stops and you kind of like have to kind of think for yourself and pick your own clothes to wear and things like that. And I know that's just really basic examples, but transitioning from being in the military to civilian, I had some great colleagues within CGI, and so that for me was really easy. I think the toughest part was the fact that COVID hit not long afterwards, so I was still getting to know the rest of the team, the wider team, so that was the biggest sort of challenge for me. And I feel really lucky that I was given the chance with CGI to come on board and learn new things, because I'm sort of very similar to Saha. I'm looking at business analyst, sort of project management, that sort of area, and that's where I'm hoping to learn more on when things sort of settle down again.
Well, it's interesting. One of the key 6 recommendations from the recent NTSC report on diversity, which was only released last week, one of those was to publicise the success stories. And Joe, yours is absolutely a success story that needs to be shared and talked about within the organisation to continue that positive rhetoric and to challenge the antiquated approaches that still unfortunately underpin some of the approaches that are inherent to larger organisations and within the industry. So publicising the success stories for businesses, absolutely critical. And it shows not just, we talked about it earlier on, didn't we, that some companies can see it as a checkbox exercise. We've hired them, that's job done. Well, no, it doesn't stop there. It's, for you now, it's going to be, how you're enabled and what your career trajectory looks going forward from here, which is really, really interesting and exciting. Do we think, I'm going to talk about, the C word, COVID, which has changed everything and how we work and where we work from. What do we think we could do? What benefits does hybrid working from home, what opportunities do you think we could do better in terms of diversity and inclusivity as a result of the new ways that we work? So hard. Have you got any thoughts about that, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's pros and cons to the hybrid working. The not so great side is not seeing your colleagues. I think it depends on your personality, but for some people it's great. They work better, not having to go into the office and do the whole social interaction. But then for others like myself, it's really important. But the benefits I've seen is that certain roles in the past where companies would say, oh no, you need to be on client site for 5 days a week to do that role, that had to change because you couldn't be on client site, but the role still was done and probably very well. So I think it's kind of made more opportunities available. For example, myself, I went from business analysis into project management because I couldn't do the travel once I had children. But then COVID came and I was able to do a BA role because I was able to do it remotely and I really enjoyed it. So for me, I thought, this is great. What was a barrier before is not a barrier anymore. So I think by having more hybrid working, you're enabling different types of people to come and do a particular role. So for example, if you have to be on client site 5 days a week, that's usually going to be people who don't have childcare responsibilities, or who think a particular way because they might be quite happy to stay in a hotel for 5 nights. Whereas if you are open to having people working from wherever, then you might have someone like me applying for the role who's brings with different perspective. So I think naturally, if we embrace the changes, it will bring more diversity into teams, because people don't have to be there physically. You can have the best of both worlds.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like you said, there's an opportunity for it to be a truly an outcome-based role, where actually you're not judged on clocking in at 9 and leaving at 5. So it means that mothers and fathers, if they can work around childcare and things like that, which is a really positive thing. The other piece that you put on there was the cultural side, and actually how does a culture of an organization, how is that defined? Is that defined by actually coming together physically and spending time with your colleagues, in which case that's probably a challenge for senior leadership, especially when we're saying that lots of larger organizations, and the NCSC report still supports this, are behind the curve when it comes to whether it's neurodiversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, training and development, and looking at ways to educate the general populace within an organisation on how they can be much more enlightened around diversity and inclusivity as a workforce. But you're having to do that from arm's length if somebody's not in the office, for more than 1 or 2 days every month. How can they do that? So it's a real challenge. I don't know if there's an answer. Sahar.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think we do that in CGI quite well. We have lots of different networks. You've got BAME, Network LGBT, the Neurodiverse, part-time parent working, and what's happened is, even though people have been working from home, these networks have enabled everyone to connect. You might have someone who's just joined the company, who will come onto one of the network calls and say, I've just joined, I don't know anybody, I don't know how to fill in my timesheet, I don't know how to do my objectives, and then someone else will say, don't worry, I'll set up a call with you, and we'll share the information. So I've found that with all the networks in CGI and the support from the directors, everyone's done, I think we've all connected really well, even remotely. They'll put a lot of effort in to making sure people are not feeling isolated. So as long as you've got a team to work with, it doesn't really matter if you're all in different locations, because I think it's how much effort people make to connect via Teams or via a phone call. I don't think, obviously physical contact in the office, having a coffee with someone is great, but that doesn't mean you're isolated if you're working on your own. Like I was working with a team with Tristan, everyone was in different offices, but we all felt like a team. We'd connect every morning, and I think where there's a will, there's a way. And our management put a lot of emphasis into social activities as well. Within each office location, we'll have budgets for social activities. Obviously, because of COVID, it wasn't done so much physically, but then they find ways around it. So I think it does come down from the top as to how much real incentive there is to make your culture that way. And if it comes from the top, then I think it's relatively easy to implement.
That's my next question was going to be, who do you think is responsible for driving? You just answered it, which it starts at the top. It starts with the leadership team, and then that flows down and through the organisation. Really, really interesting. Okay, is there an opportunity for us to make better use of the data available to be more cognizant of any challenges that arise within the company? Looking at the number of diverse candidates that companies are hiring, what their career trajectory looks like within an organisation, and also the number of people in organisations that are leaving, and then taking that information to make inferences and change. Is that something that is happening? And if not, would it work? Let's go with Tristan on that one to start with. What do you think, Tristan? It's data. What do you think?
I think I love data, but it can be a really blunt instrument if not understood and contextualized. So I can imagine a scenario where a leadership team has decided it needs greater diversity in certain areas, whether that be gender or ethnicity or whatever the metric, and deciding to track that. Now, the decision to track it in the first instance is a very positive one. So just the awareness of where are we and where do we want to be, that's a really positive thing, because once you've started to answer those two questions, then you've already started the journey. Where it becomes more challenging is if you sort of take a dashboard type view of the data without getting behind that and understanding the context and the reasons why. So for instance, if you're trying to increase gender diversity at a senior level and you find that actually you're succeeding in attracting more diversity at the application process, but that's not translating to being hired, the data would kind of give you that, but you need to get in and really understand why, and not at a superficial level. You need to dig really deep as to what's going on there. Is it something we're doing? Is it that the candidates are discovering as they get on through the process that maybe it's not the role or the culture they expected? Is our inflexibility with our working arrangements putting them off? Those, because we've got childcare and actually, to a lot of what Sahar talked about. So data is really important, but it can't be relied on as the only tool. I think data is really important as part of the toolkit to kind of addressing this. The big one's got to be, the leadership has to be absolutely committed to this, and they have to be intellectually curious beyond the data to understand what's going on.
Really interesting, thank you. So context is everything. Data can signpost, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all, and there needs to be some considerations around that. So I guess we're just about done for time. What I'm going to do is ask each of you for two things that you think, in your experience, or that you'd like to see continuing to change within the industry, that you think would make a real impact if we are going to move towards that state of safe uncertain within organizations, where they are, people are within a safe environment that they can challenge and themselves in understanding diversity and inclusivity in a much more enlightened way, and also get more people into the sector. So two things that you think could be good to implement. Let's go with Sahar first. What do you think would be good to see?
I think having more training for everyone, but in particular management at different levels, around all sorts of diversity, in particular neurodiversity, because I think a lot of people maybe don't know how to handle, or how to deal with certain situations. So I think education is really important, and making time for it. So it's not just if you have time, it would be good for you to go on that training, but mandating it, because when you mandate something, it means you're taking it seriously. Like we mandate security training because we don't want to make sure we don't break any protocols. I think that's how we should emphasize diversity training. And also, I think to try and recruit more into the industry, I think we need to change the way we advertise job roles, rather than have you got this 110%, checklist, rather than have you got these core skills that may be transferable from other industries. I think we need to be more open to that, and that way we'll actually bring in a lot more people who can do lots of roles in IT. So yeah, I think those are the two things that would make a big difference.
Fantastic. Really good stuff. Tristan, for yourself, two things that you'd love to see happen.
I think the recruitment process at the moment, it's apply for a job, send your CV in. There's all sorts of sifting processes, and it's not until quite late in the process that actually a candidate gets to talk to anyone. I think that we need to turn that around. I think actually, if the hiring manager or one of their representatives did a 15-minute call with more candidates, that one thing would tell you so much more. So I think relying on people's ability to explain who they are and what they're about and what their values are through a CV and a covering letter really is very limiting in this day and age, when we value so many other softer skills around communication, both verbal and non-verbal, etc. So that basically we're putting so much weight on people's written communication skills. So talk to people earlier, be really, really helpful. And then the other one is I think we need to recognise the reality of what it takes for people to have 30, 40 year careers and the change that's going to happen within that, and that actually training to do one thing shouldn't preclude you from going on and doing something else.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree more with that. Joe, yourself, 2 things that you'd love to see.
Well, it's just really picking up on Tristan and Sahar's points that I think training is a great thing, and just to sort of from my side, I guess, saying that you can do one thing is kind of leading on from what Tristan was saying, that you can do one thing, but then you can also look at other things as well, and sort of within the company within the company that you work in, or within moving on to a different company, if that makes sense. So like for myself, going from the military to joining CGI, in that respect, I think that's kind of like taken both of them, sort of like recruitment and training all in and adding it as just as one, I think.
No, well, absolutely, and that's absolutely valid. I think the marketplace we are in at the moment for talent within the cybersecurity and technology sector is there hasn't been a marketplace and a demand for talent that I've seen in 18 years of recruiting in the sector. So companies like CGI that are enlightened and are able to hire talent based on capability and think more creatively about who could do this job effectively, rather than simply relying on antiquated, older, barrier to entry led recruitment policies. They are the companies that are going to see rapid growth. They're going to see different ways of thinking, different ways of learning, different cultures within their business that actually pull people towards those organizations. And they're going to be the rock star companies of the future. So I think it's a business imperative as well as a moral and ethical imperative that we continue down this journey. It's fantastic to hear that you've had so many positive experiences within CGI, and long may that continue. Lastly, it's a genuine pleasure to have you with us. So thank you so much for your insights today. We will wrap up there. It's something that I think will probably take us a topic into the new year in 2022 as well. Diversity inclusivity is never complete. It's something that we have to continue to work out as an industry and a community. So we will do that. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed it at home as well, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheerio.